about all the time, and that is how to develop a competitive mindset. Ours is a sport that is, like it or not, our most tangible measure of success is body count. And I think I've always said that if you're measuring simply on body count, then you're missing a lot of the point there. But we see fighters who do well in Crown and do well in some of the inter-kingdom events, and looking at that competitive mindset, how to deal with that. There are a lot of people that have they have the skills to compete at a high level, but they're missing that mental part that allows them to be competitive. So that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. We've got with us tonight, we've got Viscount Tristan, we've got His Grace Brannos, and His Grace Ailgheanan. So I'd like to welcome all of them tonight as part of this discussion here. Brannos, you want to kick off? Give us some thoughts about what it means to be competitive.
Well, let's and I'm having a little internet trouble, so just let me know if I'm fading in or out. But once again, I look forward to talking about this subject, especially with you guys. I think there's a huge piece. I know for me, the huge part is, I'm not gonna mix words. Is a little bit of manipulation of the mind of the students I have. There's those places where if you have somebody that's incredibly competitive, it's hard to train them sometimes because they always want to go back to the winning things they do. When you have somebody that's not very competitive, then you have to help them kind of lay down the foundations of confidence and trust in their ability, and then the ability to focus in the fight itself. And those are really kind of the foundations to what we're talking about here. And then the other thing, we're going to talk about, and I think Tristan's really going to dive into this one because he has some personal experience with it, and that is the difference between competitive fighting and that mindset that we use at practice, because some people think those are the same, and they aren't. And I think we all have some lessons that came. I know I was told at one point that I probably will never be a good, I would never win Crown because I didn't have that pure competitive, mindset. And I was mad at first, and then later on, I realized what he saw and why. So I'm looking forward to talking. Tristan, throwing it at you. What kind of things you want to talk
about? Well, yeah, this is a great topic, and it's one of those things where I can't count the number of conversations I've had with people that are curious about how to expand their ability in terms of being a competitive fighter, like how to get good enough where you can bring a challenge to opponents that are at their level or higher. Like it's how do you climb that ladder? And there's usually a mistake that's made of thinking that it's purely, I need a faster shot, I need a better repertoire, I need better physical skills purely, and that will do it. And that's kind of the practice aspect of, you work on your technical skills. But if you look at those technical skills, like bricks, you can make a really great brick or a great set of bricks, but it's stacking them together to make the palace that is the mind part of the competitive fighting. It's just having really great pile of bricks is not going to build the palace. And that's something that some people fortunately have a certain mindset that lets them be competitive easier. Other people like myself, I really struggled with it. I loved practice. I loved putting on armor, loved fighting. I just really geeked out on it, and it was great. I was a very good fighter in practice, but I found that once I went in to compete, I struggled with confidence, struggled with the pressure. this has to be right now. Whereas in practice, you're like, oh, I give up. If somebody lands a shot, I mean, it's no big deal. I keep going. There's no pressure there. And that was a struggle. It was difficult for me to put in the mindset of I need to prevail over this person. It wasn't just I'm challenging myself. Now it was I have to succeed against somebody who's trying to succeed against me. And getting used to that pressure and being able to perform under that pressure was a challenge. And at first I found it, frankly, very distasteful. It wasn't fun like practice was fun. But I learned over time that it is fun if you look at it in the right way. But I've seen people struggle with it like they're drinking a poison. Like it is, they turn their mind into something that's dark and twisted. And this is where the cheating starts to come in, or their ego is so invested in winning that, yes, it will make them a better fighter, but it also comes at the price of their own reputation, their honor, and just not being an opponent that is challenging and fun to fight. And I think that's part of the beauty of SCA fighting, is that you see honestly what somebody's about deep inside, and they cannot hide it from you. But the same token, you can't hide yourself from them. And if you get to a point where your competitiveness is coming from a dark place, they'll see that, they'll feel that, and it will actually kind of eat away at you. But what I found is that there's also a great joy in competing against people at your level or higher, where you challenge yourself, you are ecstatic at the idea of facing somebody who's going to challenge you at your finest and find flaws that lesser opponents will never let you find. And if you attach to the joy, not to the dark side of competition, you can really expand your abilities. But it's really all mind. It's everything that's going on that's inside of your psyche and your mind. And it really has very little to do with your physical skills. Like time on a Pell is not going to help you build the mindset of how to compete.
Elena?
So that was really great, Tristan. That's a really interesting perspective for me, because some people would say I was blessed to always be very competitive. But I don't know that I've always found it to be a blessing. It's, as much as anything, it's been a curse at times. But I definitely come from the other perspective. I came into the SCA already very competitive. My younger brother probably still wakes up with nightmares at the kind of weird competitiveness that I had. If we'd play one-on-one basketball like outside, and if he ever won, we had to play 3 more times so I could get 3 more wins. It wouldn't be enough just to get another win. I had to erase the memory of losing. Late for dinner. It's not that it was just manifested itself in one place. I didn't want to lose at ping pong. I didn't want to lose at, as I got older and you started going to bars, I didn't want to lose at darts, and I didn't want to lose at the SCA. And probably at some point, the big shrugging the demon of competitiveness off of me was learning how to utilize it more constructively. Don't put the whole the wholeness of what you're being competitive about into a victory or a set of victories or ultimate victory. It was, channel that into, were you the best version of yourself today? And if you weren't the best version of yourself, what's your laundry list that you're taking back to training? What are you going to go back to practice with? And, my mental health and my game both improved significantly when I was able to start channeling competitiveness into those, those things that were actually going to uh, not just help me be a better fighter, uh, but to also kind of be a better human. Um, you know, I mean, I can remember, many a night in those first 10 or 15 years in the SCA of, you know, talking about whose ass I kicked that night, and, it was important to me that people know that that I was a terror on the field. And at some point, you know, I mean, I'd like to think I was good company, but you just have to know anytime you're with 10 people, there's at least 3 people thinking, wow, that guy is a total ass, and um, when I started trying to not just be a good fighter, but instead of being a good fighter so that I can kick everyone's ass, I wanted to be a good fighter to be a good example of the mindset that if we train more effectively, then we will also we'll have a more fun at what we're doing. And then I was helping people to actually achieve their fighter goals and dreams, and I'm still competitive. I still want to be really good at what I do. It's just I don't have to make victory a condition of that. Um, when we work back around to me in a little bit, I got a couple slides I want to share of some things that I was thinking about coming into this. And of course I come at this from a sports perspective. It was my early um, my early outlet for the competitiveness. And so I still see uh, competitiveness both being something that you have to have to succeed in sports and athletics and in fighting. And I also see it as eventually this thing that has to be conquered itself so that you can actually enjoy and continue on with that activity. So, um, you know, this is I love this topic, and I hope that we get a lot of good questions, a lot of questions from folks. So, I'm looking forward to the rest of this evening.
Ailgheanan, do you remember when you and I first met? Because I think it applies to this. And it was at Lily's tournament. And I was a young knight. I think Ailgheanan was also probably knighted within about a year of this tourney. And this was probably the very first real peak that I had in terms of my confidence. And I remember there was a tournament, I think it was probably about 30 people. There was like 7 or 8 nights in this tourney. And for some reason, I just decided, okay, I'm going to be confident today and I'm going to go fight this tourney. And I was doing really well. And every time I would fight the fight that I had a great time. I was riding that joyous part, and it fed into the confidence. And I met Ailgheanan as we went into the finals, and I watched him have as much joy for the fight, his fights, as I was having for mine. And I think we had just a couple little verbal exchanges as the tourney went on. But I remember going into the finals, and I was riding this just wave of, I'm having a great time. And I don't know, Ailgheanan, if you remember what I said, but before the marshals
had a beer
called
or two
Leon,
since then.
I just told him, I said, regardless of how this fight comes out, I feel like I've just made a great friend for the rest of my life. And I really felt that way. It wasn't like I need to win this tournament. I'm a knight. I need a new knight. I need to prove that I earned this belt. None of that was on my mind at all. It was like, I just knew that the two of us were going to have a fantastic fight, and we did. And how it turned out doesn't make any difference to me whatsoever, because there was such a great joy. But that competitive side was still there in myself, but it was not in the, I need to dominate this guy. It was, this is why I'm in the SCA. This is why I put on armor, and this is why I train. And this is the time it was basically my Super Bowl. It was time to go out and do what I trained to do. And it felt out of this world great.
I am so glad that you continue to describe the activity as being joyful, because that is so important. And that, it was the joy of combat that you and I noticed each other and started a friendship, but it was the joy that we found everywhere else that continued, but it's the same kind of thing. It's like, what, why do, if joy is not going to be part of an outcome of something, then find other activities. Cause the life is short. It's sometimes actually not a lot of fun for folks, and get as much joy as you can where you can. And I definitely remember that, and I remember how intense our friendship became so quickly, but it was because we both just found joy in doing the same things together.
And I think it would be dangerous to think that competitiveness would be in conflict with friendship and that kinship, and because it isn't at all. It's, in fact, I think, part of it. And
But I
told Brannos, I'll drive halfway across the country to have you kick my ass up one side of the field and down the other. It's not about whether you win or lose.
I had to move past some things, though, to be able to be that. Even then, I had to, because I don't care how this fight turns out. I think I've made a friend, and in my head, I very likely was thinking, "Me too, as long as I win." So I'm not that same person, but I mean, I still very much understand. We approach it from finding the joy, and we can't let the positive and negative aspects of competition and competitiveness, overshadow the joy part.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff going on here. I definitely want to catch on a couple of things that both of you said. First off, I want to highlight that, at the highest levels of execution of our sport, success in our sport is mental execution. It's not physical execution. I mean, you can have all of those tools, but if you don't put them together at the right time, we've made the analogy, before that, you can have, or, Ilya has made the analogy, you can take all these tools, but if you just dump your tools on a pile of wood, you don't get a chair, you just get a big mess there. So it's what you do with it. And the mental side of our game is what makes the competitive fighters. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of great fighters who have never won crown. And there's a lot of mediocre fighters who are dukes. It's and a lot of that success on that lower end, when you find somebody that doesn't necessarily have the race car kind of skills, and they go out and win a couple of crowns. A lot of that is just, because they are trying to be, as Ailgheanan put it earlier, the best versions of themselves. And, that was the thing that I kind of had to learn early on, because I had, I grew up, to a knight who was king several times in a row. And, so I saw that and I said, okay, well, that's what you do. You get knighted and you go win crown. And so there was definitely a competitive fire stoked there. But after I'd gotten in the military, I kind of wanted to have that success, right away. And so I started piling on all this baggage, all this could have, would have, should have, bullshit nonsense about, well, if I hadn't gone to the military, then I could have won crown and I could have done all these great things. And that sort of competitiveness was something that for me ended up being super toxic. Because I had to, like, my victory condition at the time was winning the tournament, whether it's Cornet or Crown or whatever the tournament was, and anything short of winning that tournament was a failure. And it was debilitating, among other things. And for me, I had to get over that level of competitiveness. And I had to realize that, once I was able to realize that I am going to do well in this tournament, and that doesn't mean I'm going to win. I'm going to go deep. I'm going to do well. And again, to Ailgheanan's point, as long as I am putting out the truest reflection of who I am as a fighter, I can handle being beaten by somebody who is just better, right? I can deal with that because again, when it's all over, I'm going to find out why that person is a better fighter, and I'm going to go to practice and I'm going to start working on those things, and I'm just going to start chipping away at that. But I cannot tolerate executing a tournament trying to be something else, trying to be something other than who I am. And I can tell you the last time I fought in a crown in where I thought I needed to do something different because my opponent in the finals was somebody that knew my fight really well. And I was like, I got to surprise him somehow. Right. Yeah. That first fight in out of 3 in that set of finals, that fight lasted exactly 3 seconds because I tried to be something other than what I am, and I got nuked for it.
Well, you surprised them.
Oh, I surprised somebody, all right. But yeah, I mean, it was a total failure because, and it was immediately as soon as that fight was over, I just had to call bullshit and say, look, you're a world-class fighter and you put out the fight that you have, and it's either good enough or it's not. And if it's not good enough, that's fine. But at least be who you are and be true to yourself as a fighter.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. And, it's going to be, I'm going to throw out a couple of, just because I like doing this. I'm going to throw out a couple of things. We talk about a lot of joy in the competition, but we also have to be very careful of that. And I tell you, there's a couple of reasons why you have to be careful. One is if you're so in search of that joyful fight, you forget about the winning portion of it. So I always tell people there's a fine line of winning, and it's a tightrope. And sometimes when you're having fun, you're on this side of the tightrope and you're off of the winning line. And then when you want it too much, like Tristan, you just mentioned, then you're on this side and it's ugly, right? So you don't win even if you maybe win the tournament. Being able to find that place where it's enjoyable and you're competitive, that you still want to win, and finding that line is a really delicate balance, and it takes work and it takes training. And people are like, well, this is, how do we get there? Well, there's a lot of things. What I have found is you can build somebody up, and then sometimes you build them up so much, then they like Sean said, then there's an expectation. It's like, well, I should be doing this. And it's like, no, you're not there yet. Right? I love you have the trust in yourself, but there's still other layers that have to get there. So then you have to back that down a little bit. You have to, that edge of letting them have that trust and confidence, and still going back and saying, hey, there's technique things we're going to work on, and there's the fight we still have to work on, and those pieces. It becomes really a game that's played, and this is where that coach comes. The coach, we look at coaches, we see this thing where somebody's yelling at a guy in the corner and tearing him down and trying to motivate him that way, or they're giving positive stuff to that guy in the corner, or they're in the locker room and kicking stuff and showing this big mad thing to try to rally their troops. Well, the trick is that they're mental exercises that coaches use to try to motivate individuals. In a team area, that's difficult because lots of people get motivated lots of different ways. If you do, I can look at a guy and say, really, that's all you got? And then they get pissed off, and then they come out, it's like, oh, I'm focused now, and then all of a sudden they have that, I don't care, I'm going to kick your ass. And that's you gave them that focus of one thing. You do that to some people and they're like, I'm locked down, I can't even throw a stick anymore. Right? So a good coach, a good trainer has to know their student, and then has to work them through those exercises. This is really a psychological game that we play on that side. Not only do we teach technique and all of those pieces, but you have to be that cheerleader, and you have to be that person that tells the truth. I mean, it's sometimes you have to say, it's like, really, I've seen you fight better than this. Let's get you back and warm you up, or get some quick, wrong Valder. Oftentimes they'll come up and he's like, man, I am just dragging, and he could be winning, but it doesn't matter. He's not picking stuff up. He's like, can we just go a couple rounds and we just do a little bit of shadow stuff and I add some quick stuff in there, and then he snaps into place, and then he goes and he's like, thank you very much. That's all I needed. Right. So those are, I didn't teach wrong elder technique there. What I did is helped him focus. You know, again, another pillar of what we're talking about, that mental mindset of winning, right? You know, and the other piece is, I have to say, there's sometimes I go into fights, and this is, I'm gonna ask all you guys, and you guys comment. I really don't care if my opponent has fun. In fact, I prefer him not. I'm not there for him to have fun. I will tell him at the end of the fight that, thank you very much for a great fight. You almost got me with this, or your pressure here, or your hand speed's incredible. But that fight's for me to win. And if I have to break my opponent down to get him to that point, that's part of the competitive mindset. So maybe not be a popular decision, but I guarantee you, I have a lot of friends, and I'm more than willing to talk exactly what I did to get them there. But I don't want the best fight out of them. In fact, I want their worst fight. I mean, it's a hard thing. I mean, everyone's like, wow, you're an asshole. But really, I mean, you know, there are times I'll ask people, you know, I'll push people to their best fight. But if I'm there to win a tournament, it's not my place. So what do you think about that, Tristan?
Nice. I'm not as experienced at the high levels of competitiveness that you are, but I've sampled that same thing. There have been times when I've stepped onto a field and made sure that my opponent could feel that this was not going to be their day, that I was ready for everything that they had. And this is the part that it took me years to start to develop that, because it at times is, like you mentioned earlier at the beginning of what you said, it can be at odds with the joy in having fun part. And that's, as I learned to expand the competitive side of my mind, when I wanted to do well in a high profile tournament, or on a day when it's like, okay, I want today to be my day. I was still there to have fun, but there was an edge to it that was not there normally. And it wasn't, what I realized is, it wasn't about being personally against who I was facing. It was about making sure that I was the sharpest that I could be, which was totally aware I need to thoroughly study what my opponent's doing, but I also need to exude the confidence that I know that I've prepared myself properly. I'm ready to go, and I'm going to make all the right decisions. If that makes sense.
All right, Ailgheanan.
So I guess piggybacking off a little bit of where Brannos was, and also trying to clarify some things. The joy, I think that when I'm thinking of it is it's almost a spiritual thing, and it's not just, it's not just fun. It's something that transcends that. And I absolutely, when I'm in a competitive situation such as a tournament, I'm trying to do well. I'm trying to hold myself to a very high standard. And in theory, that should include, where I'm at, a realistic view of things is I should be competing to win this tournament. I know where I am in the food chain. So if I hold myself to the standard every fight of just trying to fight real well, and I go out and I smoke somebody, there's joy in that. I did something that I trained to do. I executed something, a series of things that I trained, not just the week before, but my whole life at this point, to be able to do. And the execution of that brings me joy. Now, there's fights sometimes where it becomes a weird slugfest, and at the end we're both laughing, and that was fun, but that's not the same joy that I have from actually doing well. That's you found a way to have some fun out of a situation. Maybe it's because I wasn't able to control the situation that allowed it to actually be more fun. But when I find joy, I find joy in doing what I was supposed to do and doing it well. And then there's that weirder joy that comes slightly higher than that, where you find someone else who's finding their own joy from doing really well and doing what they were training to do. The fight, like Tristan was talking about before, some years after that, I had a fight with Brannos at a Candlemas when I felt like it was like when I first met him, and I fought really well and I lost, but I fought really well. I mean, at the point where I fought as well as I could without understanding a lot of things I eventually would pick up, but I fought really well. And I was elated. I wasn't elated because I knew who Brannos was. I was elated because I fought really well and I found a guy who could best me. And I hope that I'd pushed him a little bit, and, so there's that kind of joy, but I want to, Brannos has said before, winning is fun, because guys will say, I just want to have fun. It's like, well, winning is fun. And that's it's almost in that, but it's also, there is, when I play drums and and I'm in a song and I nail that song, there is joy from that I practiced how to hold the sticks and how to work the set and the rudiments associated with it and how to keep decent time. And, it's a lifetime of practice. So the execution of that lifetime of practice and training should feel good. And when it doesn't, I know I've got things to work on. I've got things to work on anyway, but I absolutely have things I got to work on, because I want that joy. I'm chasing that joy. If it's, if you want to think of it as a high, I'm chasing that high all the time. I want to do well, and I'm disappointed when I don't do well. That's not the same thing as win. So I think it's really important, to throw that out there. And I've also heard people say, and it's not because they're taking me out of context. I don't think I've always communicated this well, but I say that I practice, this nature of competitiveness and how to have, the tournament eye or the eye, whatever, however you want to think of it, that I practice that at practice. And they're like, yeah, but how are you learning how to do all these other things if you've got that major thing? And it's like, well, I think the thing that you have to remember is, and I do think this is on our list of things to talk about, is that there's a different mindset you have to practice, but you can still be very competitive in that approach. What are you working on? Are you holding yourself accountable to having learned it? Are you holding yourself accountable to having, done the repetitions to start to perfect things, or to try to even, to even begin, can I even add this to my toolbox? This movement or this shot or this understanding of how to do a range and something else, you work on these things, and you can take your competitive mindset, which is, these are my goals for practice. And if I do not do a good job of hitting these goals, then, I have to hold myself accountable. So I think you can be competitive at practice, but you do have to sort of angle it in the right place and guide it and shape it and use it in the best way you possibly can. And also just want to mention that, this is hard to teach, how to be competitive. I'm so glad that there are people here who've had to think about it. And Tristan, because he had to learn it, does a pretty good job of teaching it. And because Brannos is focused on it all the time, he does a good job of helping others, learn how to be more competitive. It always came so naturally for me. So how to shape it and direct it is where I try to work. But I mean, I very much remember I have a friend, and before he won his duchy, he was coming in third, fourth, second in crown or whatever. And, he would do okay in tournaments, but the whole thing was he wasn't focused until he thought someone had done him wrong. And, so he's like, oh, how do I make it to where I'm focused and I can actually do well the rest of the day? It's like, you can't count on someone doing you wrong. It's like, well, let's go back to practice and let's try to work on what this focus means and how to get there. But you're right. I mean, it's not like, you you can't expect someone to be thicker than you were expecting in the first and second round just so that you can actually do well the rest of the day. You've got to find your own buttons, and then you've got to figure out how to push those buttons for yourself. So, but this is a lot of fun.
You know, as Ailgheanan was talking, it's something that struck me. I've noticed two different kinds of people. The ones that take that joy of winning when they know that they made every decision right, they fought really well. That's how they got to their victory. And then there's the ones who will get upset when the only reason they won is their opponent made a stupid mistake, and they probably made mistakes, but they're just happy that they won, and that's enough. The real competitor to me is the one that says, I don't want to win by just somebody else making a stupid mistake, and be lucky enough to have won because I made a bunch of mistakes as well. They just made more, or they made the critical one at the critical moment. Because there's those two types of people. And, I think knowing everybody that I know here, they would not be happy with themselves with a win that was basically like a garbage win, but they knew they were screwing around.
No junk pool. No junk pool.
No slot pool. Exactly.
Yeah, Tristan, I've always asked that question as, not all victories are created equal, right? And I think we've mentioned on the show before. I mean, I've asked that question before. You win a handful of fights, or you even win a whole tournament, and then at some point you ask that question. It's like, well, did you win those fights, or did your opponent lose those fights? Like, did you put them in a bad position? Did you set them up? Did you make that victory happen? Or, were they just, stupid enough to fall on your thrusting tip, right? Not all victories are created equal. And, and it's having a bit of perspective, I think, kind of feeds that competitive mindset as well, because it's, it's like, yeah, I've won crown, or I've won whatever list it is that you're in, and then maybe you look along around the sidelines, and you look at all the people who were not in that list, people who maybe you don't compete well against. And sometimes you gotta look at that to kind of drive that competitive nature, to figure out, to make it such that, I mean, I can say without ego that the first crown that I won, I refer to as I ended up winning. I didn't dominate that list. I didn't, it's not one in where, where I was just that much better than everybody else. I have had crowns like that. But the first one I won is like, yeah, I ended up winning crown. And that's not to diminish the amount of effort it takes to do that. But, again, it's not all about, I went out there and kicked everybody's ass. I mean, so it doesn't always happen like that. And I mean, I've lost the finals of our crown as many times as I've won crown. And, in every loss that I've had, at some point, you have to, again, as I was saying earlier, as long as I put out the most accurate reflection of who I am as a fighter, one of the things that I want to do when I'm entering crown is I want to display to my kingdom and the populace at large the manner in which I think we should conduct ourselves in the list. And that means I'm either going to destroy everything that comes in front of me, or failing that, I'm going to accept my defeat with loss and dignity, with grace and dignity, right? And being bested and recognizing that you're bested, you can still be competitive. But I'm happy knowing that the people that ended up winning those crowns, they had to go through me to do it. I gave them good contest. And at some point, and this kind of goes to Ailgheanan's point from earlier, giving, to me, it's the contest, not the conquest. It's not the fact that I did beat somebody, it's the fact that they had to beat me, and that I gave them a fight that is worthy of that. I long ago gave up on wins and losses being my measure of success. And quite honestly, my measure of success for a long, long time now has been, I want somebody like Brannos and Ailgheanan and Tristan to say, you have to fight Sean. That is a good fight. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to be tested. And and that's my measure of success, is to have the best fighters in our sport say that's a guy that you have to fight. That is somebody that is worthy of contest. So let's kind of roll a little bit into like how folks can maybe start developing a competitive mindset, and I know it's true on you. It's really something that is hard to teach, and some of it is you have to let it go, and you have to kind of let it happen, and maybe kind of guide it along the way. I know one of the first royal lists that I won, by the time I got to the finals, and it was the first list that I won. By the time I got to the finals, I had, there's a lot going on, especially your first time getting to the finals of a royal list, right? And there was, I wasn't really sure what this emotion was at the time. But I get to the finals, and I'm, trying to find that focus or whatever. And for me, the person I was in the finals with was a friend of mine, was somebody who obviously I want him to do well as well, but when he comes right down to it, it's either him or me, and it's not going to be him. Like I'm taking this out, right? And at the time, the emotion, that the best way that I could describe what I was feeling in that moment was I had to create a little tiny bit of hate for my opponent. And it lasted just long enough for me to finish the finals. And then honestly, I haven't had to use that as a mechanism since. But it's evolved for me. That was the first royal list that I won, and that's what it felt like at the time. And by the time I won this last crown in July, best way I can describe it now is it's just focus. At this point, it's, you say tournament to me, and that sets a certain flag in my programming, and I know it's go time. But that has been a 20 plus year evolution of developing a competitive mindset. And it has at times, been met with those like having to relearn some of those lessons, right? Like going into that one crown where I'm like, oh, I got to be something different so I can compete with this guy in crown. And like, no, you just need to like be the excellent fighter that you are, and that's got to be good enough. But that was a lesson that I had to learn again after having won several crowns. So there's a lot to this. It's kind of hit and miss sometimes. Sometimes you are going to have to go back and go over some material that you thought you had settled. So it's a process, but the first part, I guess, is realizing that is something that you want to do, and that you want to be competitive, and going after those tournaments, and finding the best fighters in those tournaments, and trying to find an opportunity to fight them. So Alana, I think you had some slides. I don't know if that's a solid segue for you.
That is a perfect segue for me, because I think they definitely correspond to this part of the stream where we're trying to talk about how you can achieve the appropriate competitive attitude and the mindset. So in basketball, specifically college basketball, Coach John Wooden is considered one of the all-time greats. And he was not a fire and brimstone, scream and holler coach. He wasn't the kind that threw chairs out, in the middle of the court. And, instead, he really thought all the time about how he could take young people and teach them how to push themselves, and to set really high standards, and to become leaders themselves. And it's so funny, because he would have an entire set of things that he thought was important before we ever got to a basketball fundamental. And he thought that if he was teaching his players how to be good leaders and strong people, both mentally and physically, that then we could get to the sports side of things. And he had this thing that he called the pyramid of success, that he was always trying to instill in his players. And I think it's interesting to note that at the very top of his pyramid of success is competitive greatness. And what he meant by that isn't the same thing as like when, in sports, if you think of really competitive people, you'll think of someone like Michael Jordan, who is both the classic example of what being really competitive can help you achieve. And also he was probably nobody's friend. He was so competitive that, he probably wasn't likable as a teammate. But when we look at what John Wooden meant by competitive greatness, he meant that, and this is a quote from him, that a real love for hard battle, knowing that it offers the opportunity to be at your best when your best is required. What he meant by that, and it's the same thing that I've been trying to, I guess, stress from the beginning of this conversation, is that, you're trying to let your competition bring out the best version of you. And so when I work with people, and the thing that I notice that they need is that boost in their confidence, or that they need, to have their competitive juices flowing, more evenly throughout the entire tournament for them to achieve their goal of, and most of the cases that we're talking about here. I mean, I think it's more important that people want to be really good fighters and be on the path to being a great fighter. But to be fair, we all have people who come to us and, they want that next little bit so that they can finish up and win crown. It's been a goal of theirs since they were a young person in the SCA. They want to win crown. So, we get asked to help those kinds of people all the time. And the thing that I try to do is sneak in the larger lessons, which are how to be an overall better fighter, because that's the answer to how to win crown or any other tournament, is be the best version of yourself and put yourself in a position to win. And it's not a trick. There's not a shot. There's not a breathing technique. There's not a single one thing that people need to do normally to get over the hump. It's that they need to understand where they're weak, and they need to fix those things. And they need to, they need to work on the basic fundamentals of fighting, and then they need to have the confidence in their abilities and what they've done. They need to actually feel good about where they are and feel confident in that. And that confidence will allow you to have your first round fight and your last round fight be just as good. And that's what you're really looking for. You are looking for consistency in your effort and your focus. And, it's when you're inconsistent is why people sometimes win a tournament and sometimes come in third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 10th. Where I think, the fighters that we admire here, it's that there's a consistency, and that consistency is those things that I just mentioned. It's a consistency in effort and a consistency in focus.
It sounds boring.
You know what? It is.
I know.
the videos of the best fighters in the SCA fighting are kind of boring. Now, if you're a fighter nerd like the most of us, they're not necessarily, but for the most people just looking at them, they're like, well, they're not doing very much. It's like, yeah, because they know that if they overextend, the other person's going to take this fight. So, they're trying to not make a mistake. And so many people lose fights because they don't understand the mistakes they're about to make, and their opponents do. And
I would agree.
So anyway, those are the slides I wanted to share, and sort of where I try to guide people now when we talk about trying to up their competitive game. It really is trying to get a consistency in their confidence as much as possible. Granted, I don't know that I'm the best coach at that, so I've really been looking forward to, and I've enjoyed hearing what you guys are doing.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I get the chance to, and this is absolutely no slant on other people. One of the things that drives me crazy the most, I still love that they come and ask to do this, but it's like, can I come train for crown? And I'm like, you can come train with me anytime you want. Now you notice I didn't say crown. Just train with me anytime you want, right? Because you're not training for crown. There may be some mindset ideas and things like that, but you're just training to be a better fighter because you will carry that into ground. And that's the critical piece. So over the time period, just because I've done a lot of training, I've had lots of people from all around the known world come and train for Crown, or I've gone and to different places. And there are techniques to do this. And I'm going to answer a question about that was put in. Let me try to scroll back to it real quick because before I lose it. That was here's an example of that scenario, and that is with goals at practice in mind. With prepping for Crown example, how far out do you stop trying new things and focus on honing what you know? So there's definitely those pieces. I think one of the big pieces to hone, and this is after traveling, and this is a technique I give every place I go, and that is communication. It goes back down to communication. I had a Best ask a question: what do you do with that newbie in your tournament that you can smoke with one shot? How do you treat that guy? And it really comes down to, well, what's the tournament, right? I mean, if it's a tournament I don't care a ton about, then I might play a little bit and then do my thing. If it's Candlemass, he's going to get one shot in and put out. And this goes into that piece of, one is don't play with your food, but the second piece is if you do hold back, and this is every place I've gone to, I've done this. I said, okay, I want all the unbelts on this side, all the knights on this side, and I go to knights and I'm back to the unbelts. I'm like, so when you're training these guys, do you go full out? Do you give them some opportunities? How do you do that? We're like, oh no, we all we just train right above their level, and then we keep them in the game and so on. And I'm like, okay. And if we'll go to unbelts, and I'm like, hey, when these guys are training and they're fighting you, they kind of tone it down, and man, every unbelt face gets a pissed off look at it, right? Nobody wants you to tone it down. But we know we have to sometimes. You can't just destroy somebody. The key is communicate that, okay, we're training, so I can tone it down, I can bring it up, I can let you hit me, I can do all of these things. And then I'm like, last 3 fights, Crown rounds. And then I'm going to single shot you in the same spot, and I'll even tell you where it is 3 times in a row. And I'm going to tell you, the day that person blocks one of those single shots, he's like, I won. He didn't win. I hit him with something else, but he blocked that shot. He got to see my best game. He got to see my best shot. And now he's really on his way to learning. So one way, and this goes back to this question, every day you work on thinking about the things you want to work on, but then in each round that you do with somebody, 3 good fights, and those if you're learning to turn that button on that trigger, it's like, now I'm competitive mode. I'm gonna win. You got nothing for me. I'm gonna get 3 perfect fights, and then you take that. It's like, okay, how did those 3 fights go for me? Did I do the things I wanted to? Where did I break down? And now I can work that again, right? But you're learning. I'm training mode competitive. I practice competitive, and now I am tournament competitive. And you're learning to turn that switch on just by saying 3 good fights, right? And that allows, especially nights that don't have a lot of competition, this gets past that space where I feel guilty. Well, you shouldn't feel guilty. I told you I was going to give you 3 good fights. Hit them. And they will get better because you're showing them your best game. And you will get better because you're actually competing. You're competing against yourself. You're like, oh, I'm going to take this guy out as perfect as I can. I don't have to have any guilt. I don't have to have anything. I'm just going to do my job, right? And so that allows that communication piece there allows you to practice that focus and that competitive nature. But we have to practice that competitive nature. This is a good way to do that. Another way, of course, is once a month fight practice. I've seen, or once a month fight practice tournament, real tournament at fight practice. This really helps unbelts a lot, because a lot of times they practice. Oh, I got an event, and they never practice actually that tournament culture. And this helps them get past those stress points and all of those pieces, and turn that switch on. And that's what we're really talking about. For some people, we talked about this many times. We go in the list, I bow, my focus is set, I'm ready to go. You know, they do whatever ritual they want, and that's the way. For me, I go out there and I look and got that the same thing Ailgheanan talked about, that little bit of hate. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing in my list? Right? And it's, I don't hate them. I look, I'm like, okay, got a job to do. I'm gonna go do it.
That was Sean. I don't hate anyone.
So
that's not accurate. Everyone who's very competitive has that little bit of, you know.
Yeah.
And look, in all major sports, they do this. You know, they make an enemy of the opponent.
Yep.
Until the last whistle or the last bell or the last buzzer. Then you can be, you know, good friends again, or sportsmen or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, what in between buzzers, you know, you sometimes have to look at that person and see the enemy, you know, just, you know, to keep yourself focused and fired up. My first two crowns, I villainized the people that I was in the finals with. Were they villains? No. Right. You know, but I villainized them. My third one, I was my biggest opponent. I had way too much to drink the night before.
Oh.
And then, you know, after that, I very much was allowed. I finally got that sort of weird, for me at least, a type of fighter nirvana of, I was trying to perform to the best of my, and it wasn't just something I said, it was something I was living. And, you know, that that's just easier. I wished I had found that sooner. You know, because sometimes it's hard to make an enemy out of someone.
Yeah, I know, but I think that's actually, and then Sean, I'll just finish this. I think we all go through that a little bit. Some go through it faster, like Sean talked about, where it's like, man, this guy needs to get off my field. To, you know what, this is not about this guy, this is about me. And that it's kind of a transcending idea that allows you to get into that place. And, you know, sometimes it's shorter for some people, sometimes it's longer. So go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, for me, it you know, that first list where, you know, I just had that little bit of hate. That's what it felt like at the time, and haven't really used that as a mechanism since. But like that's been part of my process, right? And so now, I mean, really, when I go out on the field, everybody is a victim. Like you look at, like, you know, next victim is like, I'm just gonna go. I mean, and you know, I'm not gonna look at a bracket or a tree or the list or whatever. You know, I'm not really interested in who my next fight is going to be, because everybody's a victim. And as far as I'm concerned, you can just line them all up and just let me go through them all right in a row. That'll be perfectly fine with me too, so that I can, you know, and hey, that way I get to fight the whole list, right?
I would just as soon fight everybody.
Yeah, just line them all up.
You know, I'm never also, I'm not looking to know who I fight next. I don't care.
Yeah.
Right.
As
far as I was concerned, I had to fight everybody in that list.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, like Brannos and Ailgheanan as well. You know, Ailgheanan was saying, you know, you're saying that you don't think you're really such a good coach at the higher end there, but I think you're a lot better than you give yourself credit for. But Brannos and I have definitely coached a number of people, you know, over that hump, right? And I'll tell you, I mean, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, right? You know, most of the work that I've done in this regard, getting people over that hump, are people that have gone deep in a list already. You know, they've been to the semis, they've been to the finals, and they just can't quite get there, can't quite get that done. And I can tell you that without fail, the one piece of advice that I give fighters in that position that seems to have had the greatest impact is telling those fighters, forget about winning crown. It's not that you shouldn't want to. It's not that it's not a noble and worthy endeavor. but forget about the winning of the list, because we get so caught up in what it all means, right?
Yeah.
And when you get you get down to the finals, and when the thing going through your head is, who's going to be my head of court, or who's going to be the captain of my guard and all that, well, you're not fighting your fight at that point. You're you're skipping that game. You're fighting for the next thing, and it just creates a lot of noise and a lot of clutter. And the reality is, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff until it actually happens, until you actually win the list. And even then, you don't have to worry about it, because in a lot of cases, people have been waiting for you to win crown, and they're going to be throwing themselves at you to do all of these jobs that you were wondering about who's going to do what. So that's the thing I tell people all the time, is forget about winning the list. Just execute your fight. Be the truest the truest example of who you are as a fighter. It's either good enough or it's not. And if it is, if it's not good enough, then we're going to go over the video, and we're going to find out why, and we're going to get back to your training, and we're going to fix those things. Well, and if it turns out that you end up winning the list, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, congratulations, Your Royal Highness. Let me know when you're ready to look at the video, because there's something that you missed. There's something that you got away with. And I don't mean somebody cheating a list, but there are things you can end up winning a list because you just had fewer deficiencies, or the deficiencies that you had, nobody else on that particular day were able to capitalize on those deficiencies. So yeah, just forget about winning the list and just execute. Just like when you take out, because the hardest, like I said, crown is not a physical contest. It is it's a mental exercise. And the biggest obstacle in winning crown, and we talk about crown a lot because that's one of the measures that we have. We also want to talk about all of the international competition, all the inter-kingdom competition, Outlands Prize Tourney, Rose's Cancer Tourney, Candlemas, Ursulmas, Sport of Kings, Burka. There's so many things that you need to get out there, and this level of competitiveness applies to all of that as well. But forget about winning the list and just go out and execute, because the more you get wrapped up in the emotional content of what it all means, that stuff is just absolutely debilitating. That's what's going to keep you from your peak performance. And as been mentioned a couple of times, if you get too wrapped up in what this means as for your fighting career or whatever, you're gonna start creating victories or fabricating victories where they do not truly exist. And that's a problem. And that is one of those things that is going to keep you from having that reputation of being a world-class fighter. It's like, sure, he won the list, but he's a thick rhino bastard. So yeah, forget about winning the list. And I know it's counterintuitive, right? It's like, we want to be competitive, or we want to win, right? It's counterintuitive, but that's the thing that I've given to people that overwhelmingly has gotten people over the hump.
So before we jump into our next little segment that I think Tristan's going to take, I just wanted to add to what Sean was saying there. Find and cultivate honest friends. Your honest friends will help you more than you can ever know. He's talking, when Sean was talking about, you start trying to fabricate victory from where there was no victory. That's an absolutely poetic way to say you're a fucking cheater. So have friends who will call your ass on that stuff and keep you from it. And it's one of the things I have been blessed with my whole life, is friends who are more concerned about keeping each other honest than we are about hurting each other's feelings. And when I have seen people who go down the path of where they just become a fighter who has a problem, and they're traditionally, they're what the SCA would think of as being thick, I don't see those honest friends near them. So get friends who are honest and cultivate them, keep them, treasure them.
Yeah, I've always liked that honesty and truth as being a main virtue of basically of all warrior cultures. And I think that honesty is a crucial component. It's not a luxury or a perk. It's a crucial element. Brannos wanted me to talk a little bit about basically the mindset of what I'm teaching currently, which is martial arts and from a self-defense standpoint. And that is, there definitely is the mindset component. And as I cover this, because it's something that I want to impart to my students, because, you know, a lot of them that come to me, one of the benefits of studying martial art is to learn to defend yourself, dealing with sudden fear, the pressure, the desire to survive. And in a sport, we have the benefit of, what is a defeat? A defeat is you don't win a tournament, you lose a bout, maybe you get a bruise, you go have a beer with your opponent, you know, your friends. But from a self-defense standpoint, the ante gets raised to a very high level. So you talk about a very extraordinarily high level of pressure. There was a show on one of the minor cable channels years ago called I Survived. And it was a show that would highlight people that survived some incredible ordeals, whether they were, I think one guy had a accident on his bike in the Grand Canyon and he had to survive there for 3 days on his own. But others were, people were attacked, kidnapped, put into trunk of cars, things like that. Brutal. Like these were all lethal level. If they didn't survive, they would die. And one of the things that struck me in terms of the mindset of these people that survive these things is they said, today is not the day that I'm going to die. And they found, even without any training, they found something within them that just said, I am determined. I am not going to lose. I will do whatever it takes to survive this. And some of them had, you know, they would prevail over an attacker, a kidnapper, a rapist, things like that. There was kind of that ugly side, but it showed something of the mindset to suddenly have that determination to say, I don't care about, I'm not falling back on my training. It was just, I will do whatever, use whatever at hand that I have to prevail and do whatever it takes to win. And I think the beauty of sport is it allows us to tap a little bit into that mindset without having to get into raw brutality. And that true fear of dying. I mean, you're talking, you know, a warrior on a battlefield level of intensity, when we can enjoy a flavor of that. But it truly still is there. It's present. There's ways we can describe that determination that kicks in. And it's, I think, a little harder for sport competitors to put that level of burden on themselves to say, I have to win this. You know, I know there's a really great motivational story of a guy, and you know, he's a young man and he wants to make money, and he goes to this guru who's really wealthy, and he says, I want to learn to do what you do. I want to make the kind of money you do. What do I got to do? And so the guru says, all right, well, show up tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock in the morning in the park, and I'll show you. And the young man dresses up in his suit and he shows up at 5 in the morning because he doesn't know what to expect. And the guy walks him down to the beach, and he says, you know, all right, what are we doing on the beach? And he says, go walk into the water. You know, why am I walking the water? I've got my suit on. So he walks down the water, he gets up to his waist and then up to his shoulders and then right up to his mouth. He's under the water. And then the guy walks out and he takes his head and dunks it under the water and holds his head under. And the guy starts struggling and struggling and struggling. And, you know, he's just flailing, whatever. And then finally the guy lifts him out of the water and he said, when your head was under the water, what did you want to do? And he says, I wanted to breathe. He said, when you want to make money as bad as you want to breathe when you were under that water, you'll make money and you'll be successful. And I think that there's a certain amount of motivation that comes along with, it's one thing to want the $1 million. It's another thing to work for making the $1 million. And I think that's a perfect analogy to learning to fight. It's great if you show up and you want to get in armor and play knight for a day, or, you know, play a medieval warrior for a day and kind of cosplay it. It's another thing to say, I want to be good at this art. And there are no secrets. There's just do the work. And the same kind of thing. Every day that you look at going to practice, it's, I want to learn to breathe. I want to get that air. I want to get out from under the water. And you have that passion that drives you to practice, to think about your fighting. And I'm not talking about just show up every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock or whenever your practice is and then go home. I'm talking about, all right, now it's Wednesday. What did I do wrong last night? What should I be working on? on Wednesday, you say, okay, what can I start working on to prepare for next Tuesday's practice? Can I do Pell work? Can I do footwork? Can I do, what should I be working on? Make notes, like make this a project that you want to do and make that happen. If you fight 1 hour a week and that's all you think about it, all you plan about it, you're going to hit the ceiling really fast. But if you take all of your spare time where you're, thinking about TV shows or whatever other things that are filling your mind, instead of how can I make my fight better? Where are my deficiencies? What frustrates me that I should be trying to get over? Put them on your list, start finding how to tackle them, whether that's talking to coaches, talking to other fighters, gleaning and stealing stuff that they do and making it your own. Like that's a ongoing process. If you do that for 10, 15 hours a week and then go to practice, you're going to get much more out of your practice than you are if you just say, well, what did I do last week? And I'll try to work on a thing or two. And then, it's having that drive and motivation to go to the next level. In a self-defense situation, that can happen in a matter of seconds, where you, and I love the term that you used earlier, which is flip the switch. You have to flip the switch from I'm out having a beer with my friends to I'm not getting my ass kicked. And I have to do what I have to do. And I like Brannos's description of I have a job to do and it's time to do it. And from a coaching perspective or teaching instructor perspective, teaching the mindset of you're not going to turn yourself into some kind of berserker and just start flailing away. You have to go do your craft in the best way. You have to make the right decisions. And sometimes they have to be done very quickly with very little information, and you've got to execute with confidence. And I think that formula is the same with SCA fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to throw in a quick comment here. I mean, a lot of what Tristan's talking about is, something I've been saying for a long time too, is that body count is a convenient byproduct of progress. It's a byproduct of being a better fighter. It is not an indicator of being a better fighter. Like I said, you can fabricate victories and you can fabricate body count, but if you're just focusing on just being a better fighter constantly, eventually you look back behind you and you see, you see that you've got a string of dead bodies behind you, and you don't even know when they all started piling up, because you're so focused on just being a better fighter and getting those fundamentals intact. So
I think we got about 15 minutes left, and I think we probably have one more kind of run through. I mean, we gave a couple examples, and Tristan, thank you for that. I really enjoyed that conversation. And we gave a couple examples of building that focus. And I think the critical piece here is that you find those opportunities to practice your focus. And a lot of times it's not fight practice, because you do it so much that there's no change. It's sometimes it's getting out to those tournaments. Sometimes it's finding that person that pushes you. You're like, I asked my squires to give me 3 other run belts that you go 50-50 with. And oh, by the way, give me some knights you think you can go 50-50 with. And then your job is to hunt them down and find your fights with them. Right? Because now they have a goal, and that goal is single-minded. And they can practice that focus. It's like, I found you, and you have to ask nice, but I found you, and now we're going to go, because I'm going to go 60 and you're going to be 40. And later I'm 70 and you're going to be 30. And then I'm going to put somebody else on my list and cross you out. All right. You don't tell the guy that, but that allows you to build that competitive mindset. And you've got goals to work through. So, it's that kind of thing that you really, those are the exercises that help push people through those things. And you have to find what exercise for that right person. Each of us have to be, each of us have to be a little bit of counselors a good coach is a counselor. He can read somebody, and he can, and then he can push them in a direction and tell them what they need when they need it. Not an easy thing. That's a practice thing as well. But when you can find that, and you can sell that. I mean, I could go up to a guy and say, do me a favor, throw 3 people you go 50-50 with, and give me 3 nights that you think you can go 50-50 with. Or I could just say what I said, and that is, I want you to find three unbelts that you do 50-50 now, and we're going to work on making you 80-20, right? Different sales game. And when you can show that, hey, you are competing better against these people, then you fix number 1 in our list of the foundation pieces, and that is confidence. And then you start working on the number 2, which is trusting yourself and your technique to put you through a fight. And as you build those things, you essentially start building into that space of mental competitive mindset. So one last, I just took a quick note because I loved it, is that true reflection what was it? True reflection. Oh, no, I didn't write it down wrong.
The truest reflection of who you are as a fighter.
Yes. And, I really like that piece. And
because it is what it is, or you are who you are, right?
Right. And here's the piece. If you're showing somebody something different, then you're not being truthful to them, to your opponent either. So sometimes when you hold back, be careful, especially in a tournament. You holding back, you're not giving that person your best fight. So you're essentially, you don't have to destroy somebody, but you also don't want to be in that position of, the guy hits you. Well, we're back into that junk pool game because, I wasn't trying. You're not going to tell that person. If you do tell that person that, then I got a number of names for you. But that loss is on you, and you shorted that person. He wants you to fight at whatever level that you have to fight to defeat him and give him your best fight. So make sure when you go into those places that you remember that this isn't about them. This is about the fight. Make that a true fight. So thanks for that, Sean. I love that. That was that's a really good quote.
Right on. Elena, you got some final thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the means by which I try to practice using my competitiveness and the heightened sense of competitiveness well and constructively is I definitely will take it to practice. And one of the things that I teach guys around here is to, not all sparring and practice is to dominate your opponent. We're still working on things. They're working on things. You need to help them working on things. But that higher brain function of being hyper aware of the fight, you don't have to turn that off just because you're not smoking somebody. You can still be hyper aware of everything that's going on in the fight. You can still be 100% aware of your guard and stance, their guard and stance, how they're moving, where the weight on their foot is, where the weight on your feet are. You can try to be really focused on that and be able to clearly see those things. And that's a way to continue to always practice being, having the fighter's mind of what's going on and understanding both yourself and your opponent. And you can do that while you're fighting a guy at his first practice or a person at their very first practice. You don't have to turn the part of your mind off. You have to turn your sword off. You just have to tell your sword arm, stop busting that guy every time he's open, because he's open from the moment you've stepped out on the field to the moment that you leave. So, you're not learning anything. They're not learning anything. So one of the things that I do a lot is, whether it's a person's first day or a person's, wherever they are in their progression, I may back off of my offense And by offense, I actually mean the hitting part, not the range control part or the, the understanding of what they're doing and how to take advantage of it and the movement parts. But the part where you hit them, I can dial that way back. I can turn it off and leave everything else on. And I'm still practicing how to be a good fighter while I'm helping someone else learn how to fight. And so I think that there are ways that you can, not hurt yourself, because you hear this all the time. I bet everyone in here has heard someone, or they've said it. I'm the top guy at my fighter practice and I'm not getting any better because all I'm ever doing is helping other people and I'm getting bad habits and I'm doing, well, you know what? I can't, it's Morgan's probably the best person at my practice right now, but I've been the best person at my practice for 20 years. And I still got better. And it was because I was trying really hard to learn how to think as a fighter when I was dialing back how to, so that we could compete and teach and work on stuff. And, so one of the things that I always tell people though, is because I'm working on all those other things, that if they hit me, they earned a real win. They got 100% win because I was doing everything I could to keep them from hitting me. I was working on things. My brain was alert and I can tell them with honesty, it's like, no, great job. And they're like, but you weren't hitting back. It's like, I was still fighting and I was still 100% in the fight, and you still hit me. So well done. Congrats. Not many people can do that. Good job. So I think there are ways, and I don't think it's the only way. I don't think my way is the only way by any stretch. There's all sorts of other ways, where, Brannos's ability to drop in and out of various parts of the training regiment and the training brain, and then say, but now let's do 3 crown fights. That's great. I mean, that's another great way to train yourself how to be competitive when you need to be competitive. For me, I've just tried to channel all the energy of being competitive into something other than striking my opponent.
Cool. You guys have got great advice. This is probably one of my favorite episodes that I can remember recently because there's so much wonderful stuff here. And I want to add in one for those people who are not the natural competitors, that have that thing in their DNA that makes them want to go out and excel and is motivated. Because in my experience, most people don't have that built in. They need to develop it and cultivate it a bit. So I guess my advice would be to beware of that little voice that starts coming up with the excuses of, well, this fight doesn't really matter, or yeah, I can do better, or well, I've suffered a setback. Maybe that I've got my first loss in a tournament and maybe today's just not my day. These things tend to chip away at what confidence you do have, even if it might be low, that it just keeps chipping away at it. So be wary that for those that experience self-confidence problems, these are things that will always nag at you. They'll always come into play and they will stand in your way. So the mental side really that I would suggest, in addition to what these guys have all said, which is tremendous advice, is be wary of what you let your mind tell you. Don't believe it when it says, well, maybe you're not good enough. Maybe this next opponent's just you're so outclassed, it's not even, you don't have any hope, or you don't have any chance of doing well. If you go into a tournament and you have that first round loss, or you lose to somebody you didn't think you should, don't let that become a weight upon you. Just say, all right, I need to step it up. I need to tighten up what I'm doing. I need to go back to my training, go trust what I've been trained to do. Tried your best to turn those negative thoughts, discard them and go after positive thoughts that are going to motivate you. Always do what you can do. And then, if you find after the day is over that it was insufficient, which you probably did, make a list, turn that back into your training. Like what Sean talks about with the training cycle, put that on your list of, all right, we're going to take this off of my deficiencies list, and I'll figure out a way to do it, or I'll get help for somebody that can teach me how to fix this thing and do it. That process is what helps you change your mental ongoing dialogue, change it from negative to positive. And you'll never thoroughly complete that process, because if you have those thoughts, and I think they plague everybody sooner or later, just don't let them dig in and become your internal atmosphere of, well, I'm not really that good. I know this other person in the tournament's much better than I am. They're probably going to win it. All that other stuff that is automatically setting your excuses up. Try to reject that as much as you can.
Yeah. So one of the key things that I think you're going to find in all of this is that, as with much of what we talk about, there is no one right way to get this. There's no one solution that is going to work for everybody. Everybody's got their own mechanisms that they're going to have to use to find that competitive spirit. But really, there's just no substitute for experience. And if you want to be a competitive fighter, you're really going to have to enter tournaments, because we get that thing at practice where we get that do-over mentality where you lose a fight and it just doesn't matter because it was just practice. But when you get into a tournament and all of a sudden you don't get to play anymore, that hurts. And that's the kind of sting that we get that drives us to be better, and that makes us realize that I've got to go back to the training. I've got to go back to practice, in those times, when it doesn't matter, and it's just really easy to do that do-over. You gotta, you can even practice, making it so that your fighter practice does matter. And that when every fight that you have there, getting into that mindset where it's not okay to say, oh, well, I got beat, because whatever. It's like, how do I fix this? So it is a process, and it's an evolution. But it is strictly a mental exercise, and you just have to do it. And I touched on this briefly earlier, talking about international competition, inter-kingdom tournaments. One of the things that we get from inter-kingdom tournaments and events that you just don't get anywhere else is unknown skill versus unknown skill. And when you're talking about becoming a competitive fighter, and talking about being true to yourself as a fighter, right? The fight that you have has to be good enough to compete anywhere in the known world. And we put a pretty high emphasis on crown tourney because that's one of the standard measures that we have for success. But you can win crown tourney in your kingdom just because you know all the bad habits that your opponents do. But if you really want to be a competitive fighter, if you want to be world class competitive, you're going to have to enter those inter-kingdom tournaments where you don't get to Rolodex somebody. You don't get to fight them based on what they did, what you saw them do at practice, or what they've been doing for the last 6 months. Your fight has to be good enough to compete anywhere you go. And the best test for that is, like I said, that's why the Outlands Prize Tourney has always been one of my favorite lists when it was held at Estrella. Because it's just 100 plus people from all over the known world, unknown skill versus unknown skill. I don't know anything about them. They don't know anything about me. I mean, you can look at somebody with a white belt and kind of make some assumptions, but you don't know anything about this guy. And being able to compete at that level, if you want to be competitive, if you want to work on being competitive and figure out what you need to do to be competitive, do those international tournaments for sure, those inter-kingdom tournaments. So all right, so that's all I have there. So yeah, been a great show, been a great discussion. Really appreciate having everybody on tonight. We got an episode coming up next week that I think Ailgheanan is gonna talk about for us.
So we can check mark off the Kingdom of the West, which we were able to do last month. And that was the initial 2 episodes of our series, Heroes and Traditions. Next week, I invite everyone to join myself Duke Brennan, Duke Visifald, and maybe even some other special guests as we start talking about the history of the Kingdom of the East. We will jump into the formation of the kingdom and the fighters that really stood out in the early years and the first decades. We'll hope to get to somewhere, if we're lucky, we'll get to the 90s, but then we'll pick it up in a part 2 sometime after that. So please join us for that. The first 2 episodes, I think, have been a lot of fun. I know I've learned a lot, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to be involved in this series was how much I love learning about other kingdoms, and especially the history of those kingdoms and the various fighters who came before, who have paved a way for all of us to be able to participate where we are today. So join us for that, please.
All right. Well, thanks again to our coaches, Brannos, Ailgheanan, Tristan, and also in the background there, we'd like to thank Sir Thayward from North Shield for doing production for us on the back end there, fielding us all the questions and kind of help running things. So thanks for your help there, Terry. We appreciate it. So yeah, great show. Everybody have a good night, and we'll see you next week on the Coach's Corner.
Yep. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Everybody